Welcome. In Health Coaching and Beyond, Tim and I hope to mix up conversations between the two of us, chewing over hot topics, latest news and emerging ideas, but also bringing you conversations with thought leaders and people we admire in the field of health coaching and beyond. People we hope will help you think well and spark ideas for yourself. This is our first interview. Public health consultant Behrooz Behbod, a doctor who's been on a real journey of personal transformation. We start with his experience of burnout himself and how he learned firsthand about the role of health coaching in well-being. We explore his thoughts about the mind as a catalyst and how he's integrated coaching into public health. We cover Behrooz's work supporting entrepreneurs in the health sector and his vision for Patientpreneurs, a new phrase on me. We finish with discussing what we each feel are some of the core beliefs that sit at the heart of health coaching. Behrooz is clearly a compassionate and thoughtful professional who's using his health coaching wisdom across a wide range of settings. We'd really love to hear where this conversation takes your thinking.
So it's an absolute pleasure to be joined by the first guest we're having on this series. Can you believe it? And who better to have than Dr. Behrooz Behbod, who is a fellow health coach, a fellow doctor, and has some really interesting stories to tell about his journey, about his experience of working as a doctor, as a public health consultant, but also his journey into coaching and where that's taken him. So it's a real treat. So Behrooz, please introduce yourself in your own words.
Absolutely, Ollie. Well, thanks so much. It's a real honor to be the first guest. I was really a nice surprise. So welcome, everyone. You're in good hands with Ollie. So looking forward to seeing more episodes. In a nutshell, about almost 30 years ago, I think 97, 98, where I started medical school up in Leeds. And during that time, I was getting the first inklings of going down a path that probably wasn't expected of me. So I grew up in a culture that really values how our nutrition, how our home can impact our health, how various traditional remedies like herbal remedies can maybe potentially impact our health and well-being. Yeah. So I always had that in the back of my mind. And when I finished medical school, I worked as we do as junior doctors, but I was always curious about what patients were doing and not necessarily telling us as junior doctors or any doctor for that matter. And back then it was very still complementary alternative, but now you're seeing more of that in integrative and holistic approaches to health. Fast forward, I started dabbling with coaching, started a coaching training program back then with my first kind of relationship issues going on and wanting some support with that. But then because of, getting so busy with work and always thinking, okay, coaching is a nice to have, but it's not going to be what my like bread and butter, if you like. I always had it on the back burner and it was always a bucket list dream. So I went through the, PhD, master's degree, traveled the world, US, Cyprus, and did a fellowship in the US, came back, registrar training, and pandemic hits right into my first consultant post as a public health consultant. So I had that context of knowing what coaching was about, and I'd used it in my career, but not formally trained in it. When burnout hit in the peak of the pandemic, I obviously went through the occupational health route and they checked me clinically in terms of making sure there's no mental health diagnosis that needs to be made and appropriate treatment. But I remember the first, session, I think it was a occupational therapist, whoever it was, they said, you should explore coaching. And that triggered those, 20-year-old dreams again. And I started getting coaching. And so we started designing what could be next. And that's what got me into coaching as I would say more of a holistic view of our entire well-being in terms of not necessarily health coaching per se. But now, over time, working with people, I've noticed that it's their well-being and health that keeps popping up no matter what we talk about. Health coaching is definitely so broad, isn't it, Ollie? I mean,
it is, and we're definitely going to get into that. But I'm intrigued. So your journey started really with your own personal experience and burnout. I mean, what was burnout for you? It's a word that gets used a lot, doesn't it? Do you mind? What did that mean to you?
It is a word that gets used a lot, and actually, in my NHS role, we did a recent journal club where I shared a paper. It was like a systematic review looking at the impact of burnout, not just in the front-facing patient facing, healthcare professionals, but specifically in the public health professionals worldwide. And the statistics, they were always quite high anyway. Prevalence of burnout was something like 1 in 3 pre-pandemic, and then it went up to almost 1 in 2 during the pandemic. And it shouldn't be kind of confused with the saying that, oh, I'm exhausted by the end of the day or at the end of the week and I feel burnt out. It's not quite that. It's
No.
very persistent. It is almost like a chronic condition. It is an occupational one. And for me specifically, I had all the markers of what you would look for in burnout.
Mm.
I imagine, you'd worked 2 decades, almost 3 decades to get to that point where you've reached the pinnacle, the dream career, the dream family scenario as well, wife, son, everything, dream house. And it all came crashing down, all absolutely came crashing down to the point where I hated my job. I had no hope for the future. I was gaining weight again that I'd managed to lose. I was gaining weight. I was just miserable. And I remember, if I may share this, Ollie, I was
Please.
literally in this very room. I think it was summertime. And it was the end of a working day. It was almost midnight because we were working round the clock during the pandemic. And I was just death warmed up slightly. And my son, who was, I
Slightly.
think, it was terrible, honestly. I was staring at my laptop screen. My son, who was, I think, 4 at the time, came in and just said, he held my hand. I completely remember it now. He's right here, holding my hand, looking at me in the eyes and saying, Dad, it's going to be okay. And that just shook me, really shook
Yeah.
me. So there's so much more that I could explain. But one last thing I'd love to share with you about burnout, Ollie, is we often think it's just a temporary thing and we'll get over it. We'll take some time off work. 2 things came up. One was reading this literature review, this systematic review. One was the health impacts, not just the personal impacts, but the chronic risks that we're faced with in terms of not just mental health, but physical health conditions, type 2 diabetes, metabolic syndrome, all of these things are at increased risk with burnout. And then the second thing, which came up for me, is taking time off work was a kind of a temporary measure for me. I was still, even though I reduced my hours, even though I changed things around, I still felt at risk of burnout even after that. So that's where I've come to realize, and how I help people now, is that there's something else that needs to be done slightly upstream.
Thank you for sharing that. I've got that image in my head of you with your son there, and how visceral that is to know that your 4-year-old is the one that's kind of prompting you and saying, "Look, Dad, something's got to change, maybe."
Yeah, he was my
Um,
coach.
yeah, maybe there's a lot of wisdom in that, isn't there, in children? Oh, and what had built up with you, Behrooz? Was it work pressure? You were there, like you say, you're a accomplished doctor, you're a public health specialist, you've done all this training, you've got a family, Was it a culmination of pressures, or was it, what do you put it down to that got you to that point?
Yeah. I would probably give you 2 different answers. One I'll share with you now, which is what I understand to be the cause of it now. But back then, if you'd asked me, up until maybe 3 years ago, I was at the end of a kind of a train of issues. It all started probably, I would say,
Go on.
2015. When my son was born prematurely. That was a big shock first. Then a year into that, my dad got diagnosed with terminal cancer, so mesothelioma. Then the registrar training is coming to an end. He's in Cyprus. I'm here and I'm wondering, what do I do? Where do I find jobs? How do I spend more time with him in this phase of his life? And then that period, which was extremely stressful, passes after about 18 months. Then coming back to Wales and starting a new, really intense job as first consultant post. Pandemic hits. Imagine all of this stuff, trying to move house 3 times, move country 2 times, buy a new house, the whole works. And I thought that was to blame. If I look at it now and I look at how I can cope with just as much pressure now in a whole different way,
Yeah.
I would say it comes back to what you and I have spoken about and written about previously. It's the external pressures are there, and there's nothing to kind of underestimate those pressures. But the impact of those pressures on my experience are truly modifiable based on my understanding and thinking about that situation. So if I'm constantly, persistently overthinking what's going on,
Yeah.
not only do I feel more at risk of burnout and stress and then complete collapse in essence, but I also don't have the ability to do anything productive about it to change my setting.
Yeah, sure.
So
So
that's my understanding now.
it's as much the sort of the pressures being a trigger, but it's the way you responded to it and the skill set you had at the time to deal with that or not deal with it, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
yeah, there's two sides of the story. Absolutely.
Yeah, that's good. That's it's often with a lot of wisdom we look back, don't we? And with what we've learned, we look back and reassess our situation. But so that was your time when you first came into contact with health coaching for yourself personally, and tell us a little bit of how did that impact you? Was it successful? How did it influence you?
Yeah, so it wasn't necessarily called health coaching. It was
Hmm.
coaching. But when we look at health coaching, what does that mean? I mean, if taking the more holistic view of health or well-being as well, and health being one of those aspects, for me, it was mainly, at least what it felt like, was occupational scenario. So what do I do with my work and do I need to change it? And
Yeah,
then on the other hand is how do I look after my own well-being physically and mentally? So all things together in essence could be classed it is health coaching, but it wasn't at the time sold as health
sure.
coaching. It was definitely helpful, and at the time when I was coaching and consulting with private clients, mainly entrepreneurs at the time, who were getting into the field of health, and I was bringing in my kind of public health and experience into
Yeah,
the mix. I noticed we had like a kind of a group that would meet once a month or every 2 weeks actually, and we would get together and I would host and coach the group. And every single time, pretty much, I would say 90% of the conversations were mental health and well-being related.
yeah,
And
yeah.
so as I started seeing differently and, going through that change for myself, about a year or two ago, I said, I want to do more of that for the same people. And
That
that's
was
what
the
got me into
connection.
health coaching.
Yeah, lovely. So you're now a very accomplished coach, doctor. You look back at it those times with new knowledge. So where do you see health coaching fitting in now?
On the one hand, we need health coaches desperately, desperately. I would say we could not only deal with helping people do the things that they're being, prescribed to do when it comes to chronic disease management,
Yeah,
but we could do way more prevention, not just in healthcare settings, but in all settings in the community. And we're talking about moving healthcare into the neighborhoods, for example. That's where health coaching shines, I would say. But then there would be at least two other things. So, on one hand, I would say let's not just look at healthcare settings where only 10% of our health is determined.
yeah,
I would say let's look at the other 90%, our workplace, as we said, the neighborhoods and all these different settings in our neighborhood. So many places we could have coaching. But then one other thing is not just health coaching as a profession, but I would love to see coaching skills taught to everyone who doesn't necessarily call themselves.
yeah, yeah. So there's a sort of generic applicability of the skills, and then there's some specifics we could bring into healthcare and the workplaces. It's a challenge for us all, that isn't it? And in talking to you in the past, well, I love the way you describe the importance of the mind. And the one of the things that health coaching does, I guess, is kind of catalyzes changes in the mind and then changes in the body. Do you want to talk a bit to that? Because I've heard you describe that beautifully before.
Oh, no, thank you for that. Yes, I'll share that, but also something that I've been seeing in the last few days as well, which I'd love to share with
Right,
you, Ollie,
please.
as well. It's related. So, just as we look at, my PhD, for example, was environmental health and how does our environment impact our well-being, especially in those first few years of life. So I've been focusing, and I still do in my NHS role, I look at the role of the environment. But I'm always curious about how does the environment impact our mental, emotional, spiritual well-being? But how can we then do something about it? Let's not
Mm.
just, feel victims. And of course, there's a huge story to say there, but just I'd rather give people the agency or help them get the agency that they already have. And partly that's why I love working with people who are either entrepreneurs or intrapreneurs because they love to create change.
Mm.
So when it comes to the mind, in the world of public health, and you probably know this as a GP too, we talk about different levels of prevention.
Yeah.
And primary prevention is this typical like apple a day or do your daily 10,000 steps or whatever. What can we
Yeah.
do to reduce the risk of disease
So
starting in
primary
the
prevention is that you haven't got a disease, but you want to stop yourself from getting ill, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And another one is secondary prevention. This is now you've started getting the disease, but how do we detect it early? So screening, let's say breast cancer screening. And then you've got other types of more downstream prevention. But then when we go upstream, beyond primary prevention, we talk about the wider determinants of our health, education, inequalities, and so on, our
So
socioeconomic.
upstream of primary prevention, you've got wider
Yeah.
determinants of health.
Yeah, because that's where a lot of the determinants of whether you are able to access healthy food, able to access places to walk safely and have that physical activity. And that's been a lot of my focus and attention over the years, and it still is.
Your environment, your workplace, your finances, your housing, all those sort of things are important, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's primordial prevention. So that term might be familiar to some. But this, it goes one step, I would say, further upstream than primordial prevention, which
Mhm.
is how does that environment we're in impact our well-being?
Yeah.
And so that's one level that our mind serves as a catalyst or like an enzyme in a reaction. It can aggravate or worsen the negative impact of that environment on our well-being, which in turn then impacts our physical well-being. So that's on the one hand. But then working with a coach or working yourself through it if you can, how do we then pay attention to how the mind actually works so that it serves more so as a positive catalyst and not only dampens the negative impact, but actually gives you that agency to use your power of thought and creativity to drive change and positive change to make things better, not for yourself only, but for those around you.
I think that's such an interesting concept, and I'm going to put it down to you, Behrooz, having heard it from you first. Our mind is upstream of the wider determinants of health, where we think of primordial prevention, addressing those wider determinants. Even upstream of that is how our mind is enabled to either be positive or negative for us. And is that the place you see health coaching having an effect then, really right upstream?
I think that's where we have the biggest leverage, and that's probably where we do most of our behavior change work, whether or not we know about it. But definitely, there's way more that we could do. That's just one aspect of it for sure.
Yeah, no, I think that's really interesting. So, in your role now as a public health consultant, how does this come into your work then?
That's a cool question, and I'll say why.
Yeah.
So, as doctors, Ollie, we have to do our annual appraisals and then revalidation. And I love those sessions. I used to hate preparing for them, but now I just
Okay.
love them. And the last maybe two, I've been exploring the question for myself, how do I bring my two worlds together somehow? And so I would say coaching has helped in a number of ways. So number one, I show up a hell of a lot better and differently. I lead better. I'm a better team player. I'm just enjoying, I've fallen back in love with the job I thought burnt me out. So that's number one.
That's great to hear. I love hearing that.
Yeah. So there is definitely hope. If you're hearing this and thinking of quitting medicine, try coaching out. So that's number one. Number two is the coaching skills that we can use, not just with our colleagues and being better leaders and managers, but also the coaching we can contemplate and explore when we're trying to serve whoever our customer is, whether it's stakeholders in local authority, in the government sector, or if it's the community and patients themselves. So that's another aspect of using coaching. And I also use coaching. So for example, we have the NHS management training program. I had one or two people from there being assigned to me to help coach them through leadership, especially. But then outside of work, and I don't know if you asked me this necessarily, but very briefly, I continue that blend of coaching, leadership, well-being, and health, really looking at my main focus is people who are entrepreneurial or intrapreneurial within the NHS. So that's where I love to play. And it's, in a nutshell, it's going back to that mind serving as a two-part catalyst.
Yeah.
It's essentially helping them, number one, settle down and stop feeling as stressed and under pressure and maybe indecisive and so on. And instead using that same power of thought that's leading to those emotions and feelings and experiences to now use it for the way it was actually designed, to be creative and bring out these great ideas to influence positive change.
Yeah, no, I recognize the excitement around entrepreneurism. There's an energy to it, isn't there, of people who are like daring to think they can change something or to improve something. And we need more of those in the healthcare setting, don't we? Because, if we're going to progress, we need people to think boldly about things. But it sounds to me like there's a bit of vulnerability with that as well, that you see that if you're putting yourself out there, you're at risk. This entrepreneurial mind can go one way or the other, eh? It can be positive or it can be self-deprecating and self-sabotaging sometimes.
Yeah, and there's so many different ways of looking at it. First off, in those first few years of doing this, I saw so many people who were either doctors, nurses, physiotherapists, pharmacists in the health sector, professionally trained, and now they wanted to be entrepreneurial to improve.
Yeah.
But what I also loved seeing are these, what I call patientpreneurs, these people who have lived experience or caring for someone perhaps, but lived experience of a condition better than, forgive me for saying this, you or I as clinicians
Of course.
sometimes.
Yeah.
And so they came up with some fantastic ideas of bringing solutions to the market. But just one last thing on that. it's not limited to, again, healthcare. I've seen and worked with people who are in other sectors like architecture, urban design, engineering, and they're doing equally amazing things that indirectly impact our health and well-being. So it's fantastic.
Yeah, no, I love you putting that kind of recognition on lived experience. Did you call it patientpreneurs? Is that what you
Yeah,
call it? Is that the word you said? Yeah, I love that. That's great. And so your job
yeah.
outside of being a public health consultant is to support people in those creative roles. So how do you use coaching skills in that setting? Tell us a little bit about how you use those.
Yeah, so the kind of coaching that I love playing with, and I say play with because if it's not fun, it's useless.
Sure.
So I love using this is transformative coaching.
Okay.
So we have so many different types of names, but with transformative coaching, it's using the mind as a catalyst. It's helping people see how their thinking actually leads to their experience in any single moment. But then in turn, giving them the keys, if you like, to be able to drive the engine, to drive the car better, to know how to use that power of thought instead of self-sabotage. Now let's use it creatively. It doesn't have to be entrepreneurial. It can be intrapreneurial, but it can be in any it's entrepreneurial thinking. It's about identifying problems, first assessing objectively, is this a real problem or a thought created problem?
Mm.
And then going back to basic principles and then let's see what we can create change in. So it's a skill I would say everyone should have, whether or not they're going down the business and professional route.
Yeah, kind of universal skill. And you mentioned that word entrepreneurial. Do you want to
Yeah.
just, I've not, know if I know what that means. Tell me what that means.
So, entrepreneur is essentially an entrepreneur, but not doing it for their own business. So, they're now within an organization, they're employed.
Yeah.
And if you like well, maybe not so much the NHS Clinical Entrepreneur Program, because they are supporting professionals who want to start their own business,
Yeah.
but helping the NHS. But what I mean is people who are leaders, and I'm not talking about hierarchical leaders. It could be leaders at any level of the playing field at work. But these are people who see a problem, they want to do something about it, and they just get that kind of urge and then maybe the skill set to actually solve the problem in the same way you would, like identify the problem, see what the potential causes are, find, the needs that are there, find a team to put together and allocate resources to address that problem.
Yeah.
And for some, when they're entrepreneurs, they can actually generate revenue for their organizations too. And I'm sure the NHS could deal with that too.
Yeah, I like that. That's a lovely phrase. So some new ones on me there. So, entrepreneurship, patientpreneurship, intrapreneurship. I guess the common thread there is a sort of an energy and a focus on trying to improve things and create change and positivity. Is that, have I got that right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah. I guess that it's interesting, isn't it? Because I always think that's what health coaching is aiming to do, isn't it? Like you say, through the power of the mind, through catalyzing positive thought processes, we're seeking to engage people in positive change, whether that's for themselves, for their organization, or to create something new for other people. Yeah, and I can really see that. And so, how positive are you feeling about this?
Yeah, it's a good question. So one of the things that I often find is that it's hard to speak the language of coaching. And maybe this is just my personal opinion. There's a mismatch between the value that I've seen in coaching for myself, for those who are people that I know, but also people that I've worked with. There's a disconnect between that lived experience that I have with the general outlook on sometimes coaching is. It's like this soft thing that doesn't really, it feels like a nice to have, and maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. And the problem with that I see, and then I'll share the optimism that I have too, is that I think we have such a blend of people calling themselves coaches that have probably either done no training whatsoever or are inadvertently or purposefully misusing the term coaching, because not everything is coaching, or they're doing these like online 1-2 day programs that are cheap and cheerful and then calling themselves a coach and then sometimes causing harm. So there's that, right? And so it always makes me wary. And then you've also got the marketing and sales people trying to sell online businesses and lifestyle businesses and all that funky stuff. But my lived experience of it is so different. And recently, we managed to explore the role of coaching and the role of the mind in leadership, and specifically in the health and public health sector. And I was exploring this with one of the professors at Maastricht University. And she said, "Oh, this is interesting. Why don't we just put words to this and type it up as an opinion piece?" And we finally, after 6 months of the loops and hoops, got it published yesterday. So I shared that link with you. Feel free if you want to share it down
Fantastic.
below
Well, we'll certainly
somewhere.
share it in the show notes for sure, because
Yeah.
I love the way you've brought that into how coaching can nurture leadership and that sense of but it's belief, isn't it? I think at the heart of this is that there's a sort of belief model, isn't there?
What do you think of beliefs? What do you think beliefs are out of curiosity, Ollie?
Well, I definitely do believe that belief sits at the heart of health coaching or coaching in general, really. And for me, that belief is you have to believe in the person. You have to hold, I mean, Carl Rogers talked about this, didn't it? Unconditional positive regard. That you have to believe that there's something inside that person that's worth nurturing, growing, exploring. And if you hold that belief, you're never going to want to tell them what to do. You're never going to want to take over. You're never going to want to lead the approach because you believe that actually they've got the capability themselves. So I don't know if I fully understand how to
Yeah,
define a belief. That's very broad, isn't it? But I think
yeah.
I have that belief when it comes to coaching, that you have to have that central belief in the person you're working with. I don't know. What do you think? You're probably going to be
100%.
far more
No,
eloquent
no,
than.
no, 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 no. You come on, you're the expert here in teaching this stuff. But here's what I was gonna say, and then you kind of sparked something that I think
Good.
is worth sharing too. For me, when I work with clients, let's say, they often say, "Oh, I've got this belief that this, that, or the other, and how can I change my beliefs and so on?"
Yeah.
To me, a belief is essentially a recurrent or a persistent thought.
Yeah.
And our thinking is at the root of pretty much all our problems and our creative solutions. So once we understand the nature of our beliefs and our experiences and our, thought patterns, then everything shifts.
Yeah.
But more on that later if you wish. But I would say the thing that you sparked there is lovely. For me, that's not a belief. That is the truth. Everyone at the core is born with these set of skills, this creative use of thought, this sense of well-being, a smile that you see on a baby.
Mm.
If they're healthy, if they're fed, if they're dry, they're naturally smiling, they're naturally creative, they're naturally curious, they're naturally wise as to know intuitively what to do next to learn how to crawl, how to get up. We're born with that. And what I've seen, and I saw it with my 4-year-old, his
Mm.
natural wisdom was showing up at that point when he was helping me. But as he grows up, as every other child and turns up into a teenager and then adult years, I see it time and again that the only thing holding us back from what we're born with is our thinking. That's it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so you saying that, if you have that belief or that faith that everyone at the core has exactly what they need to thrive, then we can speak to that.
Yeah, it's really interesting, isn't it? I've done a lot of reading around internal family systems recently. They have that same principle, don't they? I mean, I guess all of this is to some degree a metaphor for very complex mind and brain that we all have, isn't there? But I think holding that self-confidence that actually at your core, you have a resourceful self. And
Exactly.
often what we do most of the time, we limit our resourcefulness by having negative beliefs about ourselves. We don't believe we can do it. That's not to say that, there's some things that are hard to do that we're going to have to work at and we're going to have to learn and practice, of course. But there's something, isn't there, about an internal belief that you are good and that you are worthy and that you can achieve things with the right sort of support. And I think that sits at the heart of health coaching for me. But it sounds to me like it's a fundamental belief for you in life as a whole. I'm getting that sense.
Yeah, it's I say it's more than a belief now because just like a scientist does, they've got this hypothesis, this idea, this belief perhaps, but then they go out and test it. I've tested it so many times over the last few years in my own experience, but also with others,
Yeah.
that now I just see it as physics. It's the way our experience works. There's no doubt about it anymore. But maybe it's
That's
still a
really
belief.
interesting. And I wanted to call back to what you said just a moment ago about, that sometimes people aren't coaching properly. So what do you think the essence of good coaching is then? Be it
Mm.
health coaching or coaching in general, what's the essence of it?
Great question. I'd love to share the things that maybe one or two things I was taught about good coaching and one or two things that were probably taught actually, but I've seen them more every single time I coach someone and they show up again. And you know how we have to, I don't know about you, but we have to reflect on our coaching sessions and I write
Of course.
something down. That's the common theme is the new insights that I get during those coaching sessions. So let me back up.
Yeah,
I would
I can't wait.
say I would say the number one thing is for me it's that grounding and that peace of mind for myself that when I show up into a coaching session, I'm at peace. And no matter what is going on in my world outside, for that moment, I am entirely and fully present with the person that I want to serve. So that's number one. I think secondly, it's listening. And I'm not talking about active listening. I'm not talking about nodding. I'm not talking about this fake kind of performative listening. Talking about deep listening, which is looking or listening for the feeling that I get and the insights that bubble up from here rather than me trying to overanalyze what is this person telling me. And usually when I follow that lead, when I'm fully present, I can hear it more. And when I follow that lead, the conversation usually takes me down the path that was most helpful for that person.
Mm.
So listening. And third, I mean, there's way more, but the third one that I would say is building on what you just said. It's having full faith that that person has everything that they need to be able to thrive. And just for a temporary kind of glitch in their experience, maybe they're not making full use of their capabilities. So my role is really just to point them back to their resources.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
what I see. And the final thing I'll add is the reflections, the common
Yeah,
theme
no, this is,
reflections
I'm
that I've
really,
been having.
the things we learn in the moment are so valuable, aren't they?
Yeah. So just yesterday it was. Yeah, I think right after you and I had a conversation, I had a session where I was coaching someone I've been coaching for 2 years now. Every 2 weeks we get onto a 1 hour session. And it's just having, this faith again. I call it faith. It's this faith that if I listen and if I give them the opportunity to start just speaking, then eventually they will come out with what they actually need for that session. So here's what I'm trying to say. Oftentimes, when I was in the early stages of my coaching career, I always felt fully responsible for making sure that they get something out of it. And so I
Mm.
would do all these techniques and hoop tricks and strategies to try and make sure they get their money's worth, if that makes sense. And
Yeah,
I
yeah,
ended up being less helpful because I was so worried about me and how I was performing. And the common theme that's come out in a nutshell is I just need to calm down, be at peace, and just be fully present in the moment. And the coaching session, obviously, there's tools and techniques which you teach as well, but they show up better when I'm at peace and I allow my mind to work its magic, if that makes sense. I'll
totally makes
pause there.
sense. No, and it's so hard to do, isn't it? Because I think that's an innate part of wanting to be a helper, isn't it? Is that we're all worried about what we're doing to help somebody. And actually, I guess the core part of coaching is that the kind of almost that you're not the one that matters. It's not about you. Of course, you can use skills and you refine them, as you say, as you learn to relax and to worry less about what you do. That really helps. But essentially, you're allowing that person to discover what they're going to discover, aren't they? It's not about you, it's about them.
It's creating space for them. Exactly.
Yeah, yeah. Simple, easy thing to do, right?
Absolutely easy.
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? Because it doesn't take too long to teach people the principles of it. But I guess we both see, as you alluded to before, it doesn't always get done that well, does it? Because it is quite difficult to have enough self-belief and self-confidence to do that well, I think.
Yeah. And if I may, I'll add two things to that. I think
Please.
one is, some people do things that they call coaching, but it's not. They're teaching what
Yeah.
they've done. And that's not necessarily coaching, as we both know. And then the second thing that I was going to share is kind of, it's, how can I say it? Maybe it's just me. I don't know, Ollie, what your experience in this, or maybe someone who's watching or listening to this. But there are these misunderstood preconceptions about what coaching is. And I've often found, like, from some people that they say, please don't coach me, right? It's like they feel like it's offensive if I'm coaching them.
Mm.
Or if I'm a coach and I'm seeing a friend, they're like, please don't coach me when we're talking. And that's the last thing that I do when I meet a friend.
Yeah.
I only limit my coaching to the professional scenario, the setting. So I'm curious, I don't know what you're hearing that or what viewers or listeners may hear in that, but there is this misconception about coaching too that I would love to explore at some point as well.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? My gut response to that is sometimes I think people don't want to be coached because they're actually frightened of the what it might bring out with them. If they really understand it, having space to think deeply about something often leads to some kind of change, doesn't it? Some kind of insight that could be a bit scary, a bit
Sure,
challenging. I think
sure.
so. I think sometimes a coach's role is to prepare someone to be brave and bold and to be prepared to be honest,
For a lot of us, that's really tricky, and we don't want that all the time, which I totally understand.
That's fair. That's
um,
absolutely fair.
I think the other time is that people think of coaching as being told what to do. So when they say, please don't coach me, what they actually mean is, please don't tell me what to do. And of course, I guess what we're both saying is that in its heart, true coaching never tells someone what to do, really.
Well, that's fantastic. Yeah, yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Well, a lovely conversation, Behrooz. You've covered some great stuff. Is there any last little bit of advice or sort of insight that you would want to share with someone who is seeking to implement or take on a coaching approach, perhaps in a health setting, because I think that's probably we're talking about health coaching.
Okay. Yeah, I think what I'd love to share is maybe to speak to people at two stages. The first one is if you're curious about coaching. And then secondly, if you've started and maybe you're advancing your coaching skills, if that's
Yeah,
okay.
great.
For that person who's curious, and actually this applies to all of us as coaches too, please make sure you have a coach of your own. That's number one. I
Mm,
think if you haven't been coached, if you don't know what it's like to be a client on an ongoing basis, then you're missing out. So that's number one. So definitely get a taste of it. And if you're curious, then dabble in it. Not only get a taste of it, but practice with someone in a safe setting to see what it's like. But for me, there's really no regrets about going into coaching, whether or not I use it full time, part time, or just in my job. As I said, it's made me understand how my mind and experience works. And it's made me not only a better team player and a leader, but it's made me fall back in love with the job that I almost left. So,
mm.
so that's 100% valuable. For the person who's getting into coaching, has started coaching, and is looking to develop, I think take it seriously on the one hand, but have fun on the other. So the serious side, I would say, is just like us as doctors, as other healthcare professionals, treat it as something that requires continuous professional development and training and reflection. I mentioned that earlier ago. The more you do that, the better you will be able to serve the people that you want to help. So that's number one. So make sure you're part of some form of group program, UKHCA, for example.
Yeah.
I don't know, you guys may offer some CPD as well, perhaps at peak. So that's number one. But then what I said is about not too seriously, but also fun. If this isn't fun and if we don't treat it as play, then we don't tap into that creative use of our thinking and we don't tap into our natural curiosity. And without that, we're not going to be great coaches. So make sure you're having fun while you're doing it.
And I love the way you say, in a way, what I'm hearing from that is sometimes people talk about coaching as a soft skill, don't they? When you say something might be playful or being curious, it sounds a bit, like it's kind of nice, but it's not really the kind of core hard stuff that really matters and makes a difference. I think what we're realizing, aren't we, is that mastering these soft skills in a very deliberate and purposeful way is a hard skill. It's the thing that really makes a difference to people and changes their lives. So, yeah, soft way of looking at it, playful way of looking at it, but it's certainly a hard skill set and needs to be done. Behrooz, that's been such a lovely conversation. Let's stop that. I know there's so many other places we could go, but I've downloaded enough from your brain, and I just do love the way your brain works. So thank you for sharing those.
Absolute pleasure, Ollie. Thank you. Thank you. Likewise.